I'm Rebecca Mitchell, 28 years old. Last year, I died. Well, at least from a medical standpoint. The doctors told my parents I wouldn't survive the night. And how did they respond? With cold indifference. She's not our biological daughter. We don't owe her anything, they said, before turning their backs and walking away. A week later, they showed up at my grandmother's house, eager to claim the inheritance she had left me. But when they got there, they found an empty bed and a single letter waiting. And when they opened it, everything unraveled, crushed under the truth I had left behind. Before I share the full story, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever felt forgotten, hit that like and subscribe. This one's for you. I grew up in a quiet, postcard-perfect suburb just outside of Boston, in a classic white colonial house with blue shutters and a lawn so neatly trimmed it could have been in a catalog. From the outside looking in, we were the quintessential American family, a father, a mother, 2 daughters. Our photo albums tell the story well: birthday parties with coordinated decorations, Christmas mornings buried in ribbons and wrapping paper, family vacations to Disney World, smiles all around. But photographs can be liars, can't they? They capture the surface and skip the silence between the moments. My first memory of feeling different came when I was 5 years old. My older sister, Allison, knocked over a vase while running through the living room. When Mom came rushing in, I was already crouched on the floor, picking up the shards. "What happened here?" she asked. And without thinking, I said, "I did it." It was instinct, like breathing. Later that night, I overheard my mom on the phone. "Rebecca's such a people pleaser, not like Allison. Allison has personality." That word, personality, became a kind of golden badge in our house. It was what Allison had when she threw tantrums in the grocery store, refused to eat her vegetables, talked back without blinking. Me? When I quietly did my homework without being asked, I was disciplined. When Allison finally did hers, she was brilliant. At first, the differences were subtle. Allison had the bigger bedroom. She got to pick the restaurant on family nights. Her artwork was proudly taped all over the fridge, while mine was tucked away neatly in a drawer. When I once asked my dad why my straight-A report card wasn't celebrated the way Allison's B- was, he smiled and said, "Your sister needs more encouragement, sweetheart. You're just naturally gifted." It wasn't until I was 12 that I finally understood why. It was past midnight, and I'd crept downstairs for a glass of water. That's when I heard them, my parents, arguing in the kitchen. Their voices floated up the staircase, too sharp to ignore. "You've always favored Allison," my mom hissed. "It's like you're trying to make up for the fact that Rebecca isn't your biological daughter." And in that moment, the puzzle pieces I hadn't even known I was collecting suddenly snapped into place. And so it continued. What I had thought was a family was now a carefully painted illusion, and I had just seen the brushstrokes. That night, as I stood frozen at the top of the stairs, my father's voice followed my mother's accusation like a lead weight wrapped in good intentions. "She's not your biological daughter either, Margaret. We agreed when we adopted her that we would never treat her differently." But those words, however noble in theory, came too late. The glass slipped from my hand and shattered against the hardwood floor, the sound slicing through the silence like a scream. Their argument stopped cold. I bolted back to my room, heart pounding in my chest, and flung myself under the covers, pretending to sleep as my world unraveled. Later, when my mother peeked in to check on me, the word adopted hung in the air like smoke, explaining everything and yet answering nothing. It made sense of the black hair that never matched their golden locks, the green eyes in a sea of blue, the quiet ache I'd always felt without knowing its name. No matter how hard I tried, no matter how many stars I chased, I had always been the guest in someone else's story. At breakfast the next morning, I sat stiffly, waiting, hoping that they would say something, that they would offer comfort, honesty, maybe even love, but they didn't, so I did. "I heard you last night," I said quietly, each word carefully chosen. "I know I'm adopted." My father's newspaper lowered just a fraction. My mother, mid-pour with the coffee pot, froze. Then she smiled, tight-lipped, brittle, the kind that never reached her eyes. "Don't be silly, Rebecca. You must have had a dream." And that was it. No confirmation, no denial. Just gaslighting and a return to toast and scrambled eggs, like nothing had happened. That morning, I learned that in our household, truth mattered far less than appearances. From that moment on, I threw myself into becoming exceptional. If I couldn't be loved for who I was, maybe I could be admired for what I did. I worked harder than anyone else, graduated high school as valedictorian, earned a full scholarship to MIT, and launched my first tech startup by the time I turned 22. My parents, of course, were at the graduation. They smiled for the photos, graciously accepted congratulations, as if they'd shaped me with their own hands. But behind their proud expressions was always a faint distance, a glint in their eyes like they were admiring a sculpture, rather than embracing a daughter. The only person who ever truly saw me, really saw me, was my grandmother, Martha. She lived in a charming old Victorian in Cambridge, a place that smelled like cinnamon and history, its shelves sagging with books and old trinkets. After the night I learned the truth, I spent every summer with her, starting when I was 13. She never tried to fill the silence with false reassurances. One afternoon when I was 15, as the sunlight poured through her lace curtains, she looked at me thoughtfully and said, "You have your mother's eyes." It was the first time anyone in the family had ever acknowledged that I had another mother, somewhere out there. "Who was she?" I asked. Martha patted my hand, her voice gentle but sure. "Someone who loved you very much but couldn't keep you. Someday when you're older, I'll tell you everything." But someday kept slipping further down the line. Through college, every time I brought it up, she would say, "After you graduate, then, once your career settles, and later, when the time is right." And so, the truth hovered between us like a fragile gift wrapped in waiting, as I moved forward, gathering success, carrying questions, and wondering when, if ever, I'd be allowed to unwrap who I really was. But even as my grandmother held space for me in her quiet, steadfast way, the distance between me and my parents widened like a fault line no one wanted to name. The more I built, the more they recoiled. Things came to a head when my father's corporate law firm, without hesitation or apology, took on the biggest competitor to my tech company in a high-stakes patent dispute. When I confronted him about the blatant conflict of interest, all he said was, "Family is one thing, Rebecca. Business is another." Just like that, cold, clean, as if blood could be sorted into filing cabinets. Meanwhile, Allison had become a surgeon, proudly walking in our father's early footsteps, even though he'd long since abandoned medicine for mergers and acquisitions. Still, their shared medical background gave them a bond I could never break into. Their conversations over dinner, filled with terms I had no place in, made it clear that once again I was the odd one out. Not rebellious, not rejected, just irrelevant. The final rupture came 3 years ago, at Thanksgiving dinner. Martha was there, her frame more delicate than I remembered, but her mind as sharp as ever. Conversation meandered across the table until it landed, inevitably, on the recent success of my company. "We just secured a major round of funding," I shared, trying to keep my tone even. "It's for an AI-assisted diagnostic tool we've been developing," Martha beamed. "I always knew Rebecca would do something extraordinary," she said proudly. "Well, she's always been determined to prove herself," my mother replied, that dismissive tone wrapped in a smile like it was a compliment. "Prove myself?" I echoed, my voice calm but rising with heat. "Is that what you think I've been doing all these years?" My father shrugged, casually sipping his wine. "Isn't it? It's quite common for adopted children to go through a phase of overachievement. Nothing unusual about it." His words landed like a slap. So casual, so clinical, a confirmation of the truth they had denied for 15 years, now tossed out like it meant nothing. "Dad!" Allison gasped, scandalized. "What are you even saying?" "Oh, she knows," my mother chimed in with a dismissive wave. "She's known since she was 12. I don't see why we need to dredge it up at the dinner table." "You denied it my whole life." My voice cracked as I trembled, trying to hold the weight of 2 decades in one breath. "Every time I asked, you made me feel insane just for suspecting." "We thought it was better that way," my father said in the same tone he probably used with difficult clients, measured, detached. "Children need stability." "I needed the truth," I said, my voice now steady with something deeper, resolve. My mother leaned forward, her voice suddenly sharp, laced with that familiar edge that cut deeper than yelling ever could. "The truth is we gave you everything, a beautiful home, the best education, every advantage. Most adopted children would be grateful. That was when Martha's frail but formidable hand came down hard on the table. "Enough, Margaret," she said with quiet fury. But it wasn't enough. Not for me, not anymore. 20 years of feeling like a placeholder, of conditional affection, of having my reality twisted into something more palatable for them. All of it came flooding out. "You never wanted me," I said, my voice both accusation and confession. "You wanted the idea of me, the perfect daughter you could parade at dinner parties, the one who made you look like brilliant, generous parents, without ever having to actually be them." I stood up slowly, the linen napkin slipping from my lap and falling silently to the floor. "I'm done chasing the love that should have been given freely," I said, my voice calm but final. That night, I walked out and never looked back. I changed my number, moved into a new apartment, and closed the chapter with my parents for good. The only thread I kept was Martha, my anchor, my compass, meeting her every Sunday morning over quiet breakfasts far from the shadows of that house. "They do love you," she once told me gently, her hands wrapped around a warm teacup. "They just don't know how to show it." I remember meeting her eyes and answering, "Love shouldn't be this hard." She passed away 6 months ago, peacefully in her sleep. I was away on a business trip when it happened, and I missed the funeral. My parents didn't bother to call. Not a voicemail, not a text, not even a cold line in an obituary. I found out the way orphans do, from a lawyer's letter. Martha had left me her home, her books, and most of her estate. I never got to hear the truth about my birth parents from her own lips, but life, in its mysterious way, had other plans for unearthing the secrets she left behind. The day of the accident began like any other Tuesday. I was at our Cambridge headquarters, testing the latest version of our AI diagnostic tool. Outside, a soft, steady New England drizzle blanketed the city, turning the windows gray and the sidewalks to watercolor. Around 8 o'clock, my business partner, Samantha, leaned over and said gently, "You should head home, Rebecca. The update can wait until morning." But I've never been one to walk away from unfinished work. It wasn't until after 10 that I finally packed up, and by then, the drizzle had thickened into a relentless downpour. I remember thinking I should call a rideshare, but my apartment was only 15 minutes away. What could possibly go wrong in 15 minutes? At the corner of Maple and 3rd, there's a known blind spot. Locals slow down without thinking, but the drunk driver who hit me wasn't local. All I recall is the sudden blinding wash of headlights, brighter than anything should ever be at night, the screech of metal twisting into metal, and a strange, weightless spin that seemed to last forever. They told me later my car flipped twice before slamming into a streetlight. The airbag deployed, saving my life, but breaking 3 ribs and shattering my collarbone. My head struck the passenger window with enough force to cause a traumatic brain injury. I have flashes from the ambulance, red lights pulsing through fogged glass, a paramedic calling my name again and again, the tight grip of an oxygen mask over my mouth. And then darkness. Cold, absolute, and complete. When I finally began to surface, it wasn't light or touch that reached me. It was voices, distant, clinical, unfeeling. I couldn't open my eyes, couldn't move a muscle. It felt like being locked inside my own body while the world carried on around me. Later, they would explain this as a result of traumatic brain injury, compounded by a medically induced coma meant to reduce swelling. "Significant damage to the temporal lobe," a woman's voice said calmly. "We've stabilized the intracranial pressure, but the next 24 hours are critical. Have we located next of kin?" Then came the mechanical chime of a voicemail being played, the voice different now, a man's, flat and efficient. "Emergency contact listed as her mother. We've called. They're on their way." Time doesn't flow normally when you're suspended in darkness. It bends, stretches, collapses. I couldn't tell if it was moments or hours later when I heard them arrive. "Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell," the doctor began, her voice professional but not unkind. "I'm Dr. Chin, the attending neurologist overseeing your daughter's case." "What happened?" my father asked, tight-lipped, his tone measured and in control, just like always. Dr. Chin began to explain the crash, my injuries, the induced coma, the uncertainty of it all. "And what exactly are you doing for her now?" My mother interrupted, her tone sharp, clipped, like this whole situation was an inconvenient detour in her daily schedule. "We're monitoring her brain pressure and keeping her sedated to give the swelling a chance to go down. She'll require surgery once stable to repair a fractured orbital bone. Surgery, fa, my father repeated. And what sort of cost are we talking about here? There was a pause. I imagined Dr. Chin looking at them the way doctors sometimes do when faced with families whose concern begins and ends with a dollar sign. Your insurance information would be helpful, she said at last, and we'll need your consent to proceed with the surgery. That's when the floor dropped out. There's been a misunderstanding, my mother said, her voice suddenly low and firm. Rebecca isn't actually our daughter. I'm sorry, the doctor sounded genuinely taken aback. She's listed you as her emergency contacts. She's adopted, my father said smoothly, as if explaining a clerical error. Unofficially, the paperwork was never properly finalized. I see, Dr. Chin replied, and something in her tone had shifted, subtle but colder now. Even so, as her listed emergency contacts, you don't understand, my mother cut in. She's not our responsibility. We don't owe her anything. I had lived my entire life beneath the weight of their emotional distance, but this was something else. This was abandonment, unvarnished and absolute. This was them choosing, aloud and with full awareness, to let me die. If we don't have permission for treatment, Dr. Chin began. Then don't treat her, my father interrupted. Just like that, no hesitation. Aren't there public funds or indigent care programs or whatever for this sort of thing? Mr. Mitchell, Dr. Chin tried again, this time with more urgency. Your daughter has suffered catastrophic injuries. If we don't operate, she's not our daughter, my mother snapped, final and cold. Not legally, not really. There was a pause, long, uncomfortable, followed by the soft rustle of papers being shuffled. There's also the matter of Martha Mitchell's estate, came a new voice, likely a nurse, calm but firm. The patient has been identified as the primary beneficiary. My father's response was swift and clipped. That's a family issue. My mother was not of sound mind when she signed that will. We were planning to contest it. I see, Dr. Chin replied, her voice dropping several degrees. Well then, since no family is willing to authorize treatment, we'll be proceeding under emergency protocols. Nurse Davis, please record this interaction and notify the hospital's legal department. My mother, ever composed even in cruelty, announced coolly, We'll be leaving now. Please do not contact us again about this patient. Footsteps, a door creaking open, then silence as it closed. Just like that, they were gone. Inside my broken body, I screamed. I screamed with every ounce of will I had left. I begged my limbs to move, my mouth to speak, to give any sign that I could hear them turning their backs on me, abandoning me like a piece of discarded furniture. But nothing happened. I was a prisoner, wide awake inside the ruins of my body. I've never seen anything like it, Nurse Davis whispered, her voice thick with disbelief. That's their daughter. The rich, Dr. Chin muttered bitterly. Call legal, and check her phone for alternate contacts. There has to be someone in this woman's life who gives a damn. Time blurred again, slipping through morphine-dripped fingers. I drifted between pain and numbness, caught in a fever dream of voices and beeping monitors. But one voice began to stand out. Soft, steady, always there. You're doing great, just changing Rebecca's linens now, it would say. It was Nurse Emily Davis, my unexpected lifeline. During every shift, she spoke to me like I was listening. She updated me on my vitals, explained the IVs and the scans, described the weather outside like she was painting it across my eyelids. Some days she played music from her phone, everything from Debussy to Taylor Swift. Recent studies suggest coma patients can still hear, she told someone once. I won't let her feel alone, not after what her parents did. 3 days after the crash, through the fog of her one-sided conversations, I learned the hospital had tracked down Samantha, my business partner, my trusted friend. She had rushed to the hospital, signed the consent forms, and was now fighting on every front. Your friend's a warrior, Emily told me one morning as she gently sponged my face. She's got a lawyer coming in every day to make sure you're getting exactly what you need. Apparently, your parents are trying to declare you legally incompetent so they can seize your grandmother's estate. And in that sterile room, hooked to machines and unable to speak, I felt something flicker inside me. Not just pain, not just betrayal, but the faintest stubborn pulse of hope. I almost wanted to laugh, really laugh, at the cruel absurdity of it all. They had left me to die, and then, with icy calculation, tried to exploit my near death to steal the inheritance my grandmother had lovingly left me. If that wasn't the purest distillation of who they were, I don't know what was. The surgery took place on the 5th day. I have flashes of memory, being wheeled through a corridor, glaring lights above me like a carousel of suns, and then nothing. Darkness, silence, until I surfaced again in the recovery room, my skull pounding like a war drum, and Emily's familiar, steady voice cutting through the haze. "You did it, Rebecca. Surgery went beautifully. Dr. Chin says the swelling's down. They're going to start bringing you out of the coma tomorrow." Real consciousness returned like a tide, slow and uneven. First came the ability to squeeze a hand when prompted, then a squint against the harsh overhead light, and eventually the raw, burning reality of the breathing tube being pulled from my throat. "Where?" was the first rasp I croaked through cracked lips and a mouth that felt borrowed. "Massachusetts General," Emily replied, stepping into my blurry field of vision with a reassuring smile. "You're safe now. You're going to be okay." But I wasn't okay. Not really. Not once the fog cleared and the memories returned. Because now I had to live with what I'd heard. My parents hadn't just been cold. They hadn't just failed me emotionally. They had quite literally stood by and let me die. That knowledge sat in my chest like ice and poison all at once, curling through every vein, turning even the smallest triumphs in recovery bitter. Healing was hell. Every movement sent jagged flashes of pain, ricocheting through my battered body. The first time they tried to help me sit up, I vomited from the spinning vertigo. My first faltering steps in physical therapy soaked me in sweat and silent tears. But even then, the physical agony was nothing compared to the psychic wound left by their abandonment. The betrayal festered quietly inside me, a bruise that reached into the marrow of who I was. "You're doing incredible," Samantha told me during her daily visits. She brought my laptop, handled the company's decisions with the calm of someone used to chaos, and deflected press inquiries about the accident like a pro. "Doctors say your recovery's twice as fast as expected." I gave her a weak smile, my voice hoarse but dry with a sharp edge. "Hate," I said, "is a hell of a motivator." It was during my 2nd week in the hospital, just as my body was beginning to remember how to be alive again, that Samantha finally told me about Martha. She sat in the visitor's chair beside my bed, her expression cautious but kind. "I didn't want to overwhelm you," she said softly, "but you should know your grandmother's lawyer has been trying to reach you. Your parents are contesting the will." I blinked, trying to sit up straighter despite the protest of my ribs. "What?" I croaked. "On what grounds?" Samantha's jaw tightened. "They're claiming you're mentally unfit to manage the inheritance, due to your injuries. They filed the paperwork 3 days after your accident. The timing isn't accidental." They had walked out of my hospital room, turned their backs as I lay dying, and gone straight to a lawyer's office to steal what wasn't theirs. "I need to speak with her attorney," I said, my voice cold with resolve. James Wright arrived the next morning, a distinguished man in his early 60s, with a full head of silver hair and kind, perceptive eyes behind thin wire-framed glasses. He had been my grandmother's attorney for over 3 decades. "Miss Mitchell," he greeted me with solemn warmth. "I can't tell you how relieved I am to see you recovering. Your grandmother would be proud." I didn't waste time. "My parents are trying to take her house," I said bluntly. He nodded, setting his leather briefcase down on the small table beside me. "They filed for emergency guardianship, citing your medical condition. I've submitted reports from your physicians confirming your competence. The judge has temporarily frozen the estate until you're able to appear in court. That decision now rests with your medical team. But there's no rush. The estate is secure." From his case, he withdrew a thick envelope, its weight tangible even before I touched it. "Your grandmother asked me to give you this," he said gently, "if anything happened to her before she could speak to you herself." The envelope felt heavy in my hands, heavy with something more than paper. "What is it?" I asked, already knowing. "The truth," he replied, "or at least what she wanted you to know of it." He stood, preparing to leave, then looked at me once more with genuine tenderness. "She loved you deeply, Rebecca. Never doubt that." I waited until nightfall to open it, once the nurses had finished their final rounds and the halls had settled into hush. Inside was a handwritten letter in my grandmother's elegant script, folded around several official-looking documents. My dearest Rebecca, the letter began. If you are reading this, it means I failed in my promise to tell you everything in person. Forgive the cowardice of an old woman. Some truths are simply harder to speak aloud than others. You've spent your life wondering about your biological parents. The truth is, your mother was my granddaughter, Caroline. She was only 18 when she became pregnant, young, frightened, and in no position to raise a child. Your birth father was her high school boyfriend, who left for college and wanted no part in parenting. I offered a solution that felt like the best of both worlds. My son Richard and his wife Margaret, who had struggled with infertility, would raise you as their own. You would stay within the family, and they would finally have the child they so desperately longed for. And as I sat there holding the letter in trembling hands, the shape of my life began to tilt into clarity, not prettier, not easier, but at least finally real. And as I sat there beneath the hospital's dim nightlight, that envelope still warm from my hands, the truth continued to unfold like a ribbon long overdue to be untied. My grandmother's letter went on, steady and unflinching, bearing the weight of secrets kept too long. What I didn't know at the time, she wrote, was that Margaret was already pregnant with Allison. She discovered it just weeks after bringing you home, and suddenly they had not one newborn daughter, but two. Over the years, I watched, helpless, as they treated you differently. I confronted Richard more than once. He always promised to do better, to love you as equally as he loved her, but some people cannot love what doesn't come from their own flesh, no matter how precious the gift may be. She didn't soften the truth, not anymore. The adoption was finalized legally, no matter what they may have told you. You are, by every legal right, their daughter, with all the protections and privileges that come with that. I've enclosed the court documents to prove it. I've also included the truth about your birth mother. Caroline died in a car accident 5 years ago. She never married, never had another child, but she always asked about you. I kept her updated on your life, your accomplishments, your brilliance, the remarkable woman you were becoming. Everything I've left you, this house, the estate, it is yours by blood, by law, and by love. You are my family, Rebecca, in every way that matters. Her final words trembled in my hands, even as they steadied something inside me. I hope you can forgive me, she wrote, for not telling you sooner. I thought I was protecting you, but perhaps I was only protecting myself, afraid to explain how I had placed you into the care of parents who could not love you as you deserved. But know this, I have loved you fully from the moment Caroline placed you into my arms. All my love, always, Grandma Martha. I read the letter 3 times that night, tears tracing silent lines down my cheeks. Then I turned to the documents, my original birth certificate naming Caroline Mitchell as my mother, the adoption records bearing Margaret and Richard's signatures, the amended certificate listing them as my legal parents. Everything was there, the truth, the paper trail, the irrefutable evidence that legally, morally, and by blood, I was a Mitchell, and they had lied. To the doctors, possibly to Allison, certainly to themselves. That night, I made 2 decisions. The first, I would heal. I didn't care how hard I had to work. My recovery would be complete. The second, I would ensure my so-called parents faced the consequences of their cruelty. I launched myself into physical therapy with a renewed fire. 2 broken ribs, a shattered clavicle, facial fractures, and a traumatic brain injury. None of it would stop me. I advanced from the walker to the cane in a matter of weeks, shocking even my therapists. "You're a machine," Jake, my physical therapist, muttered during one especially grueling session. "I've got unfinished business," I replied, gritting my teeth as I pushed through another rep. Pain be damned. The day finally came, a few weeks after the crash, when Dr. Chin cleared me to leave the hospital. Emily, ever the steady presence, helped gather the cascade of cards, flowers, and small gifts that had filled my room over time. They came from colleagues, friends, people who cared. There was nothing, not a single word, from my so-called family. As Emily wheeled me toward the hospital exit, where Samantha waited at the curb with her car, she glanced down at me with a gentle smile. "So, what now?" I looked up at the nurse who had defended me when my family had not, who had spoken to me through darkness and helped stitch me back together with compassion. "Now," I said quietly, "I go home and write a letter." As Samantha drove us through the familiar streets of Boston, The city passed like a silent witness. Somewhere out there, I knew, my parents were still spinning their lies, still whispering to lawyers, still counting on getting away with it all, but they didn't know what was coming. Samantha's living room became my war room. I transformed one wall into a timeline, tracing the events of the accident and mapping them against the legal maneuvers my parents had made while I lay in a coma. My laptop, always within reach, became my command center. I combed through documents, compiled emails, built strategies like a general preparing for battle. "You really should rest," Samantha said one evening, gently setting a cup of tea beside me. "I'll rest when it's over," I murmured, eyes never leaving the screen as I drafted yet another message to James Wright. My first priority was to secure my legal standing. Bots, ever precise, confirmed everything my grandmother's letter had revealed. The adoption had been finalized properly. Margaret and Richard Mitchell's claims that it had been informal were, in his words, a provable and intentional falsehood. "They have no standing to challenge the will," he assured me during one of our daily calls. "But now they're shifting tactics. They're asserting that, as your legal parents, they should be appointed as your guardians during recovery." I nearly laughed, bitter and breathless. Guardians, after abandoning me in a hospital bed? "They're claiming it was all a misunderstanding," James explained. "That they were in shock. They've filed sworn affidavits declaring deep concern for your well-being." Of course they had. But I had something they didn't expect: evidence. I remembered Emily mentioning the hospital's security cameras, how they'd likely captured everything, their callous indifference, the moment they walked away. "Can we subpoena the hospital footage?" I asked. "Already done," James replied, a touch of satisfaction curling through his voice. "The footage quite directly contradicts their sworn statements." And just like that, the scales began to tip. Not with vengeance, but with truth. Cold, undeniable, on the record truth. But securing the truth was only part of the battle. The next step was securing the property itself. Martha's house, my grandmother's home, the place that had always felt like a sanctuary in a storm. It now sat vacant, caught in the limbo of probate proceedings, and yet I knew in my bones, that my parents still had a key. "I've hired a security firm," I told James. "The consultant I brought in was thorough and professional. We'll be changing all the locks and installing motion-triggered cameras throughout the property," he explained as he set up the system. "You'll have remote access to all live feeds via phone or laptop, and we'll back up all footage to a secure cloud server." "Perfect," I said. I want every second saved. But the most difficult task, the one I'd kept putting off, was writing the letter. I must have drafted it 20 different ways, blistering with rage, cold and clinical, bitter, sarcastic, wounded. None of it felt right. One night, as I crumpled yet another failed attempt into a ball, Samantha placed a mug of tea beside me with that gentle steadiness I'd come to rely on. "You're overthinking it," she said simply. "Just say what's in your heart." "My heart wants to burn their entire world to the ground," I admitted. "Then say that." I shook my head. "This isn't about revenge. It's about truth. It's about finally being seen for who I really am." The breakthrough came in therapy, during a quiet session with Dr. Morris, the psychologist I'd begun seeing after my discharge. After I walked her through everything, the accident, the lies, the legal war, she paused and asked me softly, "What do you actually want from them?" "I want them to admit what they did," I said. "Not just what happened in the hospital, but all of it, my whole life, the lies, the emotional neglect, the way they erased me." "And if they never do?" she asked gently. The question hit me like a blunt instrument. "Then," I said slowly, "I want to be free of needing them to." That night I wrote the letter, not from a place of anger, but from a place of crystal clarity. I laid out the facts, the decades of quiet emotional abandonment, the deception surrounding my adoption, the final act of betrayal in that hospital room. I included copies of the security footage showing them walking away, and legal documentation proving the legitimacy of my adoption. But I also offered something unexpected. I offered forgiveness, not for their sake, but for mine. I released them from any imagined obligation toward me, just as I released myself from the exhausting pursuit of their love. "I no longer need your approval, your acknowledgement, or your affection," I wrote in the final paragraph. "I am whole without you." I sealed the letter in an envelope, labeled it in my own handwriting, and handed it to James. "Place it in the house," I told him. when the moment is right. And just like that, the letter became more than paper. It became my boundary, my closure, my beginning. And then, just when I thought the final thread had been pulled, the last piece of the puzzle slid quietly into place. James called one crisp Thursday afternoon with the update I'd been waiting for. "Your parents have scheduled a visit to your grandmother's house," he said evenly. "Officially, it's to collect some personal mementos before the estate is settled. They've filed documents with the probate court. They'll be arriving this Saturday at 2 p.m. A long pause stretched between us as I absorbed it. "Is Allison going with them?" I asked, my voice quieter now. I hadn't spoken to my sister since that Thanksgiving dinner 3 years ago. I didn't know if she knew the truth about the hospital, the lies, the inheritance. I didn't even know if she wanted to know. "Yes," James replied. "She's listed in the court records." I inhaled deeply, held it, then exhaled with purpose. Then it's time. On Saturday morning, James placed my letter, my carefully written reckoning, squarely on the dining table inside Martha's home. The security firm confirmed that all cameras were operational and recording. Samantha and I took our positions on her living room couch, my laptop open before us, streaming the live surveillance feed. At exactly 2:03 p.m., the familiar silver Mercedes eased into the driveway. I felt my pulse quicken, not from fear, but from the cold clarity of knowing everything was now in motion. There would be no turning back. Through the grainy feed, we watched my father, mother, and Allison step up to the front door. My father looked irritated, checking his watch like time owed him something. My mother wore her well-rehearsed charity gala smile, the kind that never reached her eyes. Allison lingered behind them, her expression unreadable, as if she hadn't decided which side of the moment she belonged to. "The key doesn't work," my father muttered, jiggling the doorknob with a scowl. "Try the back door," my mother suggested breezily. "You don't need to try the back door," Allison said quietly. This was Grandma's house. Was being the operative word, my father snapped, already pulling out his phone. A locksmith arrived within minutes. We watched as he deftly unlocked the front door, had a few papers signed, and drove off without ceremony. "Finally," my mother huffed as she stepped over the threshold. "Richard, go check if the silverware set is still here. I want to make sure Rebecca hasn't cleared the place out already." The casual cruelty of that accusation burned in my throat. Samantha reached over and rested a hand on my shoulder, grounding me. "Remember why we're doing this," she murmured. I nodded, eyes fixed on the screen as my family wandered deeper into the house I had once thought of as my only true home. "Everything looks the same," Allison said softly, trailing her fingers along the edge of the antique china cabinet in the hallway. "Mother always did have good taste," my mom agreed, inspecting a crystal vase with a covetous gleam. "This would look perfect in our front entry." "We're here to collect Dad's childhood keepsakes," Allison reminded her gently. "Not to redecorate." "Don't be naive," my mother snapped. "Rebecca's never going to recover enough to claim this estate. The judge will hand over guardianship soon enough. And once that happens, everything in this house will belong to us." Samantha's hand tightened on my shoulder, and I just stared, silent, steady, as the people who had given me life but never love walked straight into the trap built from their own arrogance. What happened next felt almost surreal, like watching a stage play unfold from behind the curtain, every beat choreographed, every emotion rehearsed in silence. On the screen before us, the drama continued to build, each line more revealing than the last. "She's in physical therapy," Allison said, her voice carrying a note of cautious hope. "The doctors say she's making significant progress." "Yes, well, her brain injury is another matter entirely," my father cut in, descending the staircase with the weariness of a man who believed himself the victim. "The silver is still in place, Margaret. I checked the master bedroom. Nothing appears disturbed." "Has anyone actually gone to see her lately?" Allison asked, pausing in the hallway. There was a flicker of discomfort between my parents, a glance exchanged like a secret being rehearsed. "The hospital staff has been uncooperative," my mother replied stiffly, pursing her lips. "And you know how Rebecca is, always so independent." "Too independent," my father muttered under his breath. "If she'd listened to me about the route she was driving." "You're not seriously blaming her for being hit by a drunk driver, are you?" Allison's voice rose, colored with disbelief. "Of course not," my mother said quickly, smoothing the tension. "Your father's just upset. This whole situation has been hard on all of us." They moved into the dining room, unaware that they were walking straight into the heart of the trap. There, sitting squarely on the gleaming mahogany table, was the letter. My letter. Its envelope bore my name, written in Martha's elegant hand, replicated from an old birthday card James had kept for this very purpose. "What's this?" my father asked, picking it up. "It's addressed to Rebecca," Allison pointed out. "Well, she's not here," my mother said sharply, snatching the envelope from his hand and tearing it open. As she read the first few lines, the color drained from her face. What is it?" my father asked, stepping closer. Wordlessly, she handed the letter to him. He scanned it quickly, his expression darkening with every paragraph. "This is outrageous," he muttered at last, his voice low and tight. "Lies, manipulation." "What does it say?" Allison asked, reaching for the letter. "Nothing you need to worry about," my father replied, pulling it back. "It's family business." "I am family," Allison said sharply, snatching the letter from his hands. She began to read, her brows furrowing, eyes widening. "Mom, Dad, what is this about abandoning Rebecca in the hospital?" My mother collapsed into a dining chair, the picture of performative despair. "It wasn't like that. We were in shock. The doctors made it sound hopeless." "It says here you told them she wasn't your biological daughter, that you didn't owe her anything," Allison read aloud, her voice beginning to tremble. "That you left without signing consent for treatment." "That was taken out of context," my father stammered. "We were just trying to explain that the adoption situation was complicated." Allison kept reading, her face growing paler by the second. "There's a link here to security footage." She pulled out her phone, typed the URL carefully into her browser, and hit play. For several minutes, the only sound in the dining room was the tinny audio from her phone. My parents' voices, cold and unmistakable, stating clearly and without hesitation that I was not their daughter, that they owed me nothing, that they would not authorize care. The truth at last had a voice, and it was their own. And just like that, the illusion shattered. Years of careful avoidance, of selective memory and cold performance, collapsing under the weight of one undeniable moment. As the last seconds of the video played and the screen faded to black, silence fell over the dining room like dust settling after an explosion. "They left her to die," Allison whispered, her voice cracking under the gravity of the words. "Their own daughter. She's not my mother started to say, then caught herself, choking on the truth. "Not your what?" Allison snapped, stepping forward. "Not your daughter, because according to these," she waved the adoption documents I'd enclosed, "she absolutely is. Legally, fully. You adopted her. You raised her for 28 years. And when she needed you most, you turned your backs." "You don't understand the complexities of this situation," my father began, his tone heavy with patronizing deflection. "I understand perfectly," Allison shot back, fire now in her voice. "I always knew you treated her differently. I thought maybe it was because she was the oldest, or because she was too smart. And you expected more of her, but now I know better." And then, quiet, steady, I spoke, my voice transmitted through the speakers, pre-recorded hours earlier by James at my request. "They told the hospital staff I wasn't their biological daughter, that they didn't owe me anything," I said. "That wasn't a slip in judgment. That wasn't grief talking. That was their truth." "That's not my truth," Allison cried, her hands trembling. "You're my sister, my big sister, who taught me how to ride a bike, who helped me with my college applications, who took the blame when I wrecked Dad's car. You were always there for me, and I never really saw what they were doing to you, how they erased you piece by piece." I had done those things, quietly, without resentment, because that's what older sisters did, even when they were invisible, even when they stood in the shadow of the family's golden child. My mother straightened then, her spine stiff with the icy resolve she always wore when challenged. "We gave her everything," she said, each word sharp as glass. "A top education, every opportunity." "Except love," Allison finished, her voice flat and devastating. "Everything except the one thing she actually needed." And in that quiet, trembling pause that followed, it was clear, no amount of justifications, no twisted reasoning or polished denial could unmake what they had done, or unwrite what I had finally made visible. And as I watched the live feed continue, I saw the moment of recognition take hold in my sister's eyes, slow, aching, irreversible. It was as if the puzzle she'd been subconsciously assembling her entire life had finally clicked into place. Years of moments she hadn't fully understood now stood before her, stark and undeniable. All those times they dismissed her accomplishments, she murmured, almost to herself. All the times they made her feel small, it wasn't because they held her to a higher standard. It was because they never believed she belonged. "That's not true, Bob," my father insisted, his voice tight, rehearsed. "We always wanted the best for her." "The best," Allison's voice climbed. "You left her, alone with a brain injury and broken bones, to die in a hospital bed. That was the best you could do?" My mother suddenly stood, clutching at a last thread of control. "We need to find Rebecca. Clearly, she's been poisoned against us. That Samantha girl, she's always had a bad influence." "She knows about the guardianship filing, doesn't she?" my father said, scanning the letter again with growing dread. "She knows we're trying to take control of Mother's estate." "That's all you care about?" Allison snapped, her face etched with disbelief. "The money, the house? What about your daughter, the one who almost died?" "Of course we care about Rebecca," my mother said, almost by reflex, as if the words themselves were an incantation. "But we have to be realistic," she continued. "In her condition." "Her condition that you made worse by walking away," Allison cut in, voice shaking with fury. "And now you're trying to exploit it, to take what's hers." My father's expression hardened. "That's enough, Allison. This doesn't concern you." "Doesn't concern me?" she repeated. "Rebecca is my sister." "Half-sister," my mother corrected automatically, too quickly, and immediately clapped a hand to her mouth, as if trying to shove the words back inside. Allison stared at her like she'd just been slapped. "So it's true," she whispered. "You really don't see her as family." The realization hit her visibly. Like a weight dropped straight into her chest. Her hands trembled as she gathered the letter and the documents. "I can't be here right now. I can't be near you." "Allison, wait," my father called as she stormed toward the door. "I'll be at my apartment," she said without turning. "Don't call me. I need time to process all of this." Her hand gestured vaguely but forcefully to the entire house, the scene, the decades of buried truth. After she left, the feed showed my parents standing in stunned silence, the weight of what had just unraveled pressing down like thunderclouds. "Look what you've done now," my mother hissed, breaking the stillness. "You've turned Allison against us too." "Me?" my father barked. "You're the one who called Rebecca her half-sister? She is, and now both our daughters hate us. And Rebecca's going to use this letter and that video to destroy us in court." He began pacing furiously around the dining room, running a hand through his thinning hair. "We need to call Gerald, our lawyer. He'll know what to do. We can say we were distraught, not thinking clearly." "That video, Richard," my mother hissed. "It shows us calm, clear, rational." "Then we say it was edited. Deepfakes are everywhere these days." She sank back into the chair. "This is a nightmare." And for the next hour, they schemed, calling Gerald, rummaging through the house for anything they could claim as heirlooms, building lists of potential character witnesses who could attest to their devotion as parents. It was painful to watch, but it was also illuminating. Not once did they ask how I was doing. Not once did they question whether what they had done to me was wrong. Their focus remained, as always, on control, on appearances, on preserving their access to my grandmother's money and influence. When they finally left, carrying a few small antiques Allison had earlier protested, I closed the laptop. "Well," Samantha whispered beside me. "That's exactly what I expected." "They haven't changed," I replied, the truth settling in with a weary certainty. "They never will." A soft buzz broke the silence. My phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "It's Allison. We need to talk. Please." I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I typed my reply with steady fingers. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., cafe on Cambridge Street. Whatever came next, I was finally ready to face it. On my own terms. The cafe on Cambridge Street was bustling with the late morning rush when I arrived, leaning heavily on my crutches. Allison was already there, seated at a corner table, 2 untouched coffees in front of her. She looked up as I approached, her eyes widening at the still fading bruises and healing scars on my face. "Rebecca," she said, rising awkwardly, hovering between a hug and a handshake before settling on an uneasy nod. We sat. Allison, I greeted as I lowered myself into the chair opposite hers. You said you wanted to talk. She pushed one of the cups toward me. Black with a dash. That's still how you take it, right? I nodded, surprised that she remembered. Thanks. I didn't know, she blurted. About the hospital, about them leaving you there. I swear, Rebecca, I had no idea. I believed her. Allison had her faults, but calculated cruelty had never been one of them. Did you read the entire letter? I asked. She nodded, her expression miserable. And I watched the video. I can't believe they would do that to anyone, let alone their own daughter. Not their daughter, I corrected quietly. Not in their eyes. But I was legally, and we grew up together. You're the daughter of the girl who had me. That makes you my sister, Allison. She reached for my hand across the table, but I pulled back slightly. 28 years, I said, my voice low, steady. 28 years of watching them love you without hesitation, while treating me like affection was something to be earned or rationed. Did you really never see it? She flushed, her eyes dropping to the table. I noticed they were harder on you. I thought it was because you were the oldest, or maybe because you were so smart. They just expected more. They told the hospital staff I wasn't their biological daughter, I said evenly, though inside the wound still pulsed. That they didn't owe me anything. That wasn't some emotional outburst. That was what they really believed. That's not my truth, Allison insisted, her voice catching. You're my sister, my big sister. You taught me how to ride a bike. You helped me with my college apps. You covered for me when I wrecked Dad's car. I had done all of that, because that's what older sisters did. Even when they were pushed aside, even when they longed for the love their siblings received freely. What do you want from me, Allison? I asked, the question blunt and unavoidable. She blinked, startled. I want us to be sisters again. Really be sisters. I've missed you these past 3 years. And our parents? I asked. Where do they fit into this new picture? Her expression darkened. I don't know, I'm not speaking to them right now. After what they did, I don't think I can forgive it. They'll pressure you, I warned. They'll downplay everything, rewrite the whole narrative. I know, she said, offering a faint, rueful smile. I've read their script too many times. We sat there in silence for a while, the steady hum of the cafe rising around us like static. Cups clinking, milk steaming, voices overlapping, while the two of us remained still in the eye of it all. Finally, Allison broke the quiet. Can I ask you something? She said softly. What did the letter you left for them actually say? I mean, the whole thing. I took a slow sip of coffee, weighing whether I was ready to share it all. Then I pulled out my phone and opened the file where I'd saved the final draft, the one I'd read aloud into the silence of my grandmother's dining room. I looked her in the eyes and began, steady and clear. Dear Richard and Margaret, I read. I use your first names because Mom and Dad no longer feel appropriate. Parents protect their children. Parents put their children's needs above their own. You did neither. I could see Allison stiffen slightly, but she said nothing. By the time you read this, I continued, you will have filed papers declaring me mentally unfit. You will have begun crafting a story in which you are the devoted parents and I am the ungrateful daughter. Let me save you the trouble. I'm alive, despite your best efforts. I paused, let it sink in, then went on. The doctors at Massachusetts General recorded your refusal to authorize treatment. The security footage captured your exact words. She's not our biological daughter. We don't owe her anything. For 28 years, I tried to earn your love. I excelled in school. I built a successful company. I tried everything to make you proud. It was never enough, because I was never enough. Not your blood, not your real daughter. I watched Allison as I spoke, her hands trembling slightly on the edge of her coffee cup. Grandma Martha left me a letter explaining everything. My birth mother was her granddaughter, Caroline. The adoption was legal and binding, regardless of what you told the hospital staff. I've enclosed copies of all relevant documents. I've also included a USB with the hospital security footage. It will be submitted as evidence if you continue to pursue control of my inheritance or attempt to seek guardianship over me. I took a deep breath before reading the next part. This letter is not about revenge. It's about truth. The truth that you could not love me the way I deserve to be loved. The truth that, when I needed you most, you chose to walk away. I lowered my voice slightly. I forgive you, Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. I release you from any obligation to me, and I release myself from any obligation to you. I no longer need your approval, your recognition, or your love. I am whole without you. Rebecca Mitchell. My thumb hovered over the final lines, then I read them, even in final. P.S. The locks have been changed. This house is mine, legally. Please direct any future communication to my attorney, James Wright. When I looked up, Allison was staring at me, silent, her eyes glistening. Neither of us spoke for a moment. There was nothing else to add. The letter had already said everything. When I finished reading, Allison was quietly crying, her shoulders trembling as she wiped at her face. "That's the most honest thing I've ever heard," she whispered, "and the saddest." I slipped my phone back into my bag. It had needed to be said. "They called me 6 times yesterday," she added, her voice thick with disbelief. "Left voicemails talking about how worried they are about you, how much they want to help with your recovery." She shook her head, disgusted. "It's like they're living in a parallel reality." "They are," I agreed calmly. "One where they're always the heroes of the story." Allison looked at me, eyes searching. "So what now? With the inheritance? The guardianship?" "James is handling it. The hospital footage alone is enough to sink their case." I took a sip of coffee and shrugged. "I move forward. I build a life without the minute." Her voice softened. "And what about me? Is there room in that life for me?" I looked at my sister, the half-sister who had benefited from the favoritism I'd drowned under, the daughter they'd cherished while I was left to scrap for scraps of affection, but also the woman who had chosen truth over comfort, who had stood in my corner when it would have been easier to turn away. "I don't know," I said honestly. "There's a lot of history between us, Allison, a lot of pain." She nodded, dabbing at her eyes. "I understand, but I'd like to try, if you'll let me." I thought about Grandma Martha's letter, that a family is made of those who love you, not necessarily those who share your blood. "Small steps," I finally said. "We start small and see where it leads." Relief spread across her face. "Small steps. I can do that." We finished our coffee, cautiously navigating neutral topics. Her internship at Boston General, the latest tech pivot my company was exploring. It wasn't comfortable, but it was civil. And maybe, just maybe, it was a beginning. As expected, my parents escalated once they found the letter. They called every lawyer they knew, tried to shop around for a judge who would approve their guardianship petition. They attempted to access my medical records, claiming parental rights. They even reached out to my doctors directly. None of it worked. The video footage was irrefutable, and James Wright stood like a wall between them and anything they wanted. The guardianship request was denied. The probate judge ruled in my favor. The house and everything in it belonged to me, legally and completely. 3 weeks after our coffee shop meeting, Allison called again. "They're filing a new motion," she said without preamble. "They're trying to dispute the adoption now, claiming Grandma Martha coerced them into it, that they never actually wanted it." The words should have broken my heart. Instead, I felt strangely calm. "Let them," I said. "The documents are clear. The adoption was lawful." "This isn't about winning anymore," she said softly. "It's about hurting you." "I know," I replied. "I always had." "How are you?" I asked gently. "I moved out of my apartment," she said. "I'm staying with a friend from the hospital. I can't be around them right now. I'm sorry." And I was sorry. Because despite everything, Allison was losing her parents. The loving, devoted people she thought she knew. Learning what they were capable of must have torn her entire world apart. "Don't be," I told her. "It's not your fault." There was a pause. Then her voice softened with hesitation. "I was actually wondering, your grandmother's house is pretty big, isn't it?" I smiled despite myself. "Are you asking to move in with me, Allison?" "Just temporarily," she rushed to say, "until I figure things out. Only if you're okay with it." It was a big step, bigger than coffee, but maybe it was time for big steps. "The East Wing has a private bath," I told her, "and I'm rarely home before 8 anyway." "Really? Are you serious?" "Small steps, remember?" I said. "We'll see where it leads." After we hung up, I sat in the window of my temporary apartment, watching the city breathe. Somewhere out there, my parents were surely strategizing their next move, still unwilling to accept the truth of what they'd done, still incapable of seeing me as their daughter, still chasing a narrative in which they were righteous and I was disposable. But for the first time since the accident, I no longer felt defined by their rejection. I was defined by my survival, by my resilience, and by the family I was choosing to build around me. The letter had done its work, not by changing them, nothing ever would, but by freeing me from needing them to. 6 months after the accident, Dr. Chin declared my physical recovery officially complete. The last brace came off. The final follow-up MRI showed no signs of lingering brain trauma, and my physical therapy sessions were reduced to monthly check-ins for maintenance. "You're a medical miracle," she said during our final appointment, her voice equal parts astonishment and admiration. "Most patients with your injuries would still be in intensive rehab." I had strong motivation, I replied simply, thinking of the letter, my parents, and the life I was determined to reclaim. No matter what it took. I moved into Grandma Martha's house, now my house, at the beginning of spring. The Victorian was in need of some repair, but I kept the original architecture intact. The intricate woodwork, the stained glass windows, the wide porch where she and I had once sat through long summer evenings, talking about books and dreams. Allison moved into the East Wing as planned. At first, cohabitation was awkward. Too many childhood patterns needed undoing, too many old sensitivities to navigate. But we set ground rules, respected each other's space, and over time, tentatively, we began building a relationship rooted not in duty, but in choice. My business partner, Samantha, became a regular visitor, often bringing her laptop and a bottle of wine. Emily, the nurse who once sat at my bedside and refused to leave me alone, now worked with a home health agency and dropped by often for tea or laughter. Even James Wright started joining us for Sunday brunch, continuing the tradition I had once shared with Martha. One morning, as he sipped his coffee and watched Allison and Emily debating the virtues of different medical specialties, while Samantha cleared the plates, he smiled and said, "You've built yourself quite a family here." I smiled back, quietly correcting him. "Chosen family," I said, "the best kind." Of course, my parents made one final attempt to reclaim control. They filed a civil suit for emotional damages, claiming my letter and the hospital footage had caused them significant psychological harm. It was a desperate move, transparently vindictive. The judge dismissed the case with prejudice, stating plainly that truth could not be considered defamation. In his written opinion, he remarked that they had abandoned their daughter at her most vulnerable moment, and were now attempting to punish her simply for documenting that fact. The ruling made local headlines. Former colleagues, distant relatives, and country club acquaintances all saw the story. The carefully manicured social reputation Richard and Margaret Mitchell had spent a lifetime cultivating collapsed overnight. They left Boston a month later, quietly relocating to Florida, without saying goodbye to either of their daughters. When the news reached us, Allison turned to me with concern. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. I thought about it, really thought, and then nodded. "Yeah," I said, "I think I am." Because the truth was, they had abandoned me long before they physically left. And maybe, just maybe, they were never really with me to begin with. With the legal battles finally behind me, I turned my focus forward. My tech company had not only survived my absence, but thrived, thanks to Samantha's steady leadership. Now, we were deep into development on a new piece of software inspired directly by my time in the hospital. A communication system designed for brain injury patients who were conscious but unable to speak. "We're calling it Bridge AP, I explained to Emily over dinner one night. It tracks eye movement and neural activity to help doctors identify levels of consciousness in unresponsive patients. It would have helped you, she noted. It'll help doctors, I corrected gently. I knew I was aware, they didn't. The project had given purpose to my pain, transforming something traumatic into something that might offer hope to someone else. Martha would have approved. Meanwhile, my relationship with Allison continued to grow. Not effortlessly, but earnestly. We had hard conversations about our childhood, about the favoritism she unknowingly benefited from, about her own passive role in my isolation. But we also found healing. She brought home takeout when I worked late. I helped her study for her certification exam. We discovered a shared, shameful love of terrible reality TV and spent many Sunday nights roasting contestants and mocking over-the-top dramatics. I never knew you were this funny, she said once. laughing so hard she nearly choked as I imitated a particularly theatrical housewife. "You never really knew me at all," I replied, not bitterly, just honestly. It was the truth, and now we were changing that. Exactly 1 year after the accident, I hosted a dinner party in Grandma Martha's dining room, now mine. Samantha came with her new boyfriend. Emily arrived with her wife, beaming and warm. James Wright brought an obscenely expensive bottle of champagne. Allison invited a colleague from the hospital, a neurosurgeon with kind eyes, who looked at her with the kind of quiet admiration that didn't need words. As I looked around the table at the people who had chosen to stay, who had shown up when it mattered, I felt something whole inside me, something that had nothing to do with the validation my parents had always withheld. "I'd like to make a toast," I said, raising my glass. "To family, not defined by blood or law, but by love, by choice, and by showing up when it matters most." "To family," they echoed, glasses clinking together, and for the first time in a long time, I believed it completely. Later that night, after everyone had gone home except for Allison, I found myself sitting on the porch swing where Grandma Martha and I had spent so many evenings. The wood beneath me worn smooth by memory. The air was cool, humming with the quiet chirp of crickets and the occasional flicker of fireflies dancing in the dusk. "Is there room for one more?" Allison asked softly from the doorway, her silhouette framed by the warm glow from inside. I patted the space beside me, and she joined me without another word. "Do you ever wonder where they are now?" she asked after a long pause. "What they're doing?" I considered the question. "Sometimes," I said honestly, "but it doesn't hurt anymore." She turned to me, her expression tinged with both curiosity and longing. "How did you do that? Make it stop hurting?" I thought for a moment, then replied, "I think about the letter I wrote, about the truth it held, and the freedom it gave me. I stopped waiting for them to be something they never could be, and I started building a life that didn't need their approval to feel meaningful." Allison nodded slowly. "I'm still working on that part." "It takes time," I told her gently, "and you don't have to do it alone." We sat together in companionable silence, watching the fireflies flit through the thickening twilight. Somewhere in the distance, a car engine roared to life, an echo of the accident that had changed everything. But instead of fear or sorrow, I felt only gratitude for the road that had led me here. The truth had nearly destroyed me, but it had also set me free. If you've come this far with me, I hope my story resonates with those who've known the sting of conditional love or the ache of familial betrayal. Remember, family is defined by actions, not by blood, by the ones who stay when others walk away. Have you ever had to redefine what family means for yourself? Share your story in the comments below. And if something in my journey struck a chord, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they too can build a life filled with chosen family, people who truly see them. Thank you for being part of my healing simply by listening. And remember, sometimes the family we create is stronger than the one we're born into.